Start the recording, and we're going to start the webinar. So let's get the party started. Hello, Louise. Hello, Laura.
Hi.
Hi.
How are you both?
Wonderful.
Very good, thank you.
Good. I'm going to give Facebook and the webinar a couple minutes to let people get settled in. And as people are joining, I'll chat a little bit so they don't miss any of the good conversation that's going to happen today. So just a little real quick about Warwick's. So Louise, where are you calling in from today?
So ordinarily I would be in the UK, but I'm actually in Crete on holiday. So it's quite late in the evening. We're 10 hours ahead.
Wow. So good thing we did do this at 11 o'clock Pacific time. And Laura, where are you calling in from?
I am in Raleigh, North Carolina, where it's 2 p.m. in the afternoon, bright, beautiful, sunny fall day here. But I really wish I was in Crete with Louise.
Right? I think we did something wrong in not planning all of us to be there.
Not that there's anything wrong with La Jolla, California, but come on, let's admit it. We all want to be there in Crete with Louise.
Exactly. Well, then you did mention La Jolla. So for those that are joining us maybe from outside of the San Diego area and aren't familiar, Warwick is located in La Jolla. It's a little town just north of the San Diego area in California. My little sign there says 1896. We're actually celebrating our 125th anniversary this year. So I know, Louise, for the UK, that's like an infant, but for the United States, being in business for 125 years is kind of a big deal. So we got some fun things planned for the fall. So if anybody that's watching that's not on our email list, get on that. We got some stuff happening in November. Real quickly, for those of you that are joining us in the webinar, the chat is open. But if you have a question, there's also a Q&A button at the bottom. So go ahead and pop your questions into there. If you're joining us on Facebook, go ahead and pop your questions into the comment section. I'll be monitoring those and I'll bring them into the conversation. Louise and Laura are going to talk for about 35 minutes, and I'll bring those questions into them after that. I'll be talking to you in both the Facebook and the Zoom chat on how to order the books from Warwick. So you can choose, we can ship anywhere. UK might be a little tough for us to get the book to, but if you're in the US, we can get you your book pretty easily if you're not in the La Jolla area. But if you are in San Diego, we would like nothing more than for you to come by the store and shop with us. There's wonderful, great things to find at the store. Lots of other good books besides Louise and Laura's that you can get as well. So if you click on that link, you can choose pick up in store. So with that, I think I've given Facebook and the webinar enough time to kind of let everybody know what's going on. So I'll intro these ladies and then pop off screen and let the conversation begin. So Louise, is it Fein or Fein?
Fine.
Fein.
Yeah.
Was born and brought up near London. After a law degree at Southampton University, she worked in Hong Kong and Australia and enjoyed traveling the world. I think she still enjoys traveling the world. Before returning to London to settle down to a career in law and banking. She holds a master's degree in creative writing from St. Mary's University, London. Louise lives in the beautiful Surrey countryside, as she said, with her husband, 3 children, and small dog. She's here today to talk to us about her latest book, and I think you might have it there, Laura, The Hidden Child.
I have that one.
Oh, you've got, there we go. And today too, we also have, we're so lucky, we got 2 great authors today. Laura Morelli. Laura holds a PhD in art history from Yale University and is taught at the college level in the US and in Italy. She is a TED Ed educator and a columnist for National Geographic Travel. I think she might like to travel a little bit too. Italy magazine. Her debut, The Gondola Maker, garnered Ippy and Benjamin Franklin Awards. And she's here today to talk about her latest book, The Stolen Lady. There it is. All right, ladies, have a great conversation. I'll see you back in about a half hour or so.
Great, thank you.
Sounds good. Thank you so much. And I hope all of you have gone out to pick up Louise's new book, The Stolen Child. It's really great. The Hidden Child. I'm sorry, I conflated our 2 titles. Isn't that ridiculous? But it's so interesting, and I've been really looking forward to talking with you about your inspiration for the novel and how you came to this story. It's such a an unusual tale. Maybe for the readers who are not as familiar, you could just tell them a little bit about what it's about, and then I'd love to ask you some questions about it.
Sure. Okay. So The Hidden Child is set in 1928 and 1929, primarily in London. It does have some little parts set in New York as well. It's about a couple called Edward and Eleanor, who are quite well off. Everything is going really well for them. Edward is a very well-renowned psychologist and educator, and he's up and coming in the world. His wife, Eleanor, has a beautiful 4-year-old daughter called Mabel, and everything is perfect until Mabel develops seizures. Now, Edward and Eleanor are very strident eugenicists, which for people who don't know about the eugenics movement, that is really the concept of breeding a better type of human. The sentiments all sound so awful, so I'm trying to pick my words, knowing that we've got a modern readership. But at the time, it was a very, very well accepted principle that really came out of Darwinism, the concept of survival of the fittest. And we today associate it much more with Nazi Germany, but actually it was very widespread in the UK and the US in the first part of the 20th century. So that's a sort of brief summary of the story.
Yeah, and I love that you broached a subject that is so complex with the medical ethics and the moral questions, and to follow along in the footsteps of these characters and see them wrestling with these big complex subjects was really fascinating, and I think keeps readers turning the pages. How did you come to this subject of eugenics and specifically to epilepsy and childhood epilepsy, which is such a novel subject?
Yes, it sounds a little bit random, but really it came out of for 2 reasons. My youngest daughter suffered from a very severe form of epilepsy when she was tiny. She was only 2, and she was having upwards of 100 seizures every day. So it was really quite severe. And at the time, I encountered a lot of stigma, which I was quite surprised about. And I also discovered that some of the treatments being offered to us, or potentially offered to us, were in widespread use in the 1920s. So that was one side of the inspiration. The other side really came out of the research that I did for my debut novel, Daughter of the Reich, which was set in 1930s Germany and obviously featured the Nazis, and they took the eugenics to the nth degree. And it was really through studying that I realized just how widespread it was and how it had come from the UK. And that was really the 2 things that came together for me into this book.
Wow, it's amazing. And I didn't realize that you had such a personal experience with this, and how terrifying it must be to watch your child go through that. I mean, I can hardly imagine that. It's really, and then for you to, to write about it is really something. Did you see yourself in Eleanor? Did you, is there part of you in that character?
Well, of course, Eleanor is of her time. So she was very much a stay-at-home mother who actually, she did have a job before she married Edward, but at the time, obviously, you would be expected to give up work, which was not something I've ever done. But I suppose I could obviously relate to her as the mother of a child who was struggling. And I would just like to say that my own daughter is now a young teenager, and she's fine. She has no more seizures, and she's doing really, really well. But obviously had she been born 100 years before, her outlook would have been very, very different. And the likelihood is she would have been put in in an institution. So yes, of course I did relate, but yeah, that would have been a very different outcome.
Wow. Well, I'm really pleased to hear that she's doing well. And it's, in reading your book, it really, this is one of the things that I love about it is, we can only look at history through our own lens, that, from 2021, right? And so I think it's really, this is one of the things I love about historical fiction, is that it really puts us into the mind and the mindset of people living long ago. And as you say, this eugenics was widely accepted. It was considered sort of cutting edge, and there was all this research around it. And so that part was really fascinating to me. And I think I particularly love this character of Edward, Eleanor's husband, because he's so complex. And without spoiling anything, as we go through the story, we're not sure whether we're rooting for Edward or whether he's a good guy or a bad guy, and we're not sure. And so I think that is it's great, because you keep turning the pages to see, so there's something about Edward that we don't know the full story, right? There's something there, there's a secret that we don't understand the full story until later. And so he's really a wonderfully complex character. Was he based on a particular historical figure, or was Edward a character that allowed you to uncover, to turn over all of these moral rocks, I guess I would say?
Thank you. Yeah, I absolutely loved writing Edward. He is based on a real character, and yeah, that's something I wanted to talk to you about, because obviously in your book you've got real characters, but I changed Edward's name. So the real character behind Edward is someone called Sir Cyril Burt, and the reason I changed his name was because I have taken some liberties with him. I have given him a backstory, which the real Sir Cyril Burt didn't have. And I think I've also made him a slightly nicer person than the real Sir Cyril Burt, who didn't have many redeeming features, put it that way. But yeah, Sir Cyril Burt was a very strident eugenicist, and he set up the sort of school system in the UK, whereby the idea was you separated the sort of brighter upper class children from the lower class children. Because in the UK, the eugenicist movement was very much based around class, whereas perhaps in the States and in Germany, it was more racially motivated. So there were some differences there. Yeah,
that's very interesting. And, Edward, he does have so many, things going for him. He seems like he's this very upstanding man at the beginning. He's an accomplished professor. He's a decorated World War I hero. And then as the story goes along, you realize that there's a lot more going on underneath the surface. And Eleanor has some things that she has to come to terms with as she learns more about her husband. And it's not what she thinks at first, right? Again, without giving away too many spoilers.
Yeah, that's right.
The other interesting thing that you do in this story is that the disease of epilepsy itself has a voice, which I was really intrigued by. And epilepsy sort of serves like a narrator in certain little interludes within the book. Tell me about that, how you came to that, and how the disease itself became personified for you as a writer.
Yeah, so I don't know what your technique is for writing, but I'm very much not a planner. So I just sort of have an idea and a theme, and I start writing. And I actually tried to write some of the story from the perspective of Mabel, who's the little girl, but I really struggled with that, and her voice just wouldn't come. She was very young, and I found that quite difficult. And so one day I just sat down and epilepsy just came out on the page. I think it probably began with the idea that when my own daughter was very poorly, I wrote poetry as a way of sort of, I don't know, releasing tension. And I wrote a poem where epilepsy was a monster who had taken over my child, which is kind of how a lot of people, I did a lot of research, and a lot of other people refer to it as a persona, like we do with certain diseases. And this voice just came, and it was a really useful sort of literary device, because it sort of plays with the reader, and it enabled me to show what was happening to Mabel while she was in an epilepsy colony, which would otherwise have been quite tricky to do. But it also has its own narrative curve, its own storyline, and I hope people like it. It's a little bit different, but it's, yeah. I hope people.
Yeah, I thought it was. I thought it added a really interesting dimension. I've seen it done with the plague in a story that I read recently, and I think we can probably all relate to that now in a way that we couldn't before 2020. But I mean, I think anyone who's struggled with a disease could probably relate and imagine it as personified in this way. And I agree that it allows you as a writer to reveal information maybe that the reader wouldn't have access to otherwise, which is very handy indeed.
It is, but and Laura, while we're chatting, I really want to ask you some questions as well, because I absolutely love The Stolen Lady, and I think whilst our books are really, really different, there are definitely some things that we both did. You also wrote about real people in your book, and you use their real names, and I'm really intrigued as to how you went about that, how much liberty you felt you took with writing real characters.
Yeah, it's a good question. And I think, The Stolen Lady is a dual timeline story that takes readers between Florence, Italy at the turn of the 16th century, and then to the French countryside over the course of World War II. And there are some real characters in both storylines. And, obviously we know a lot more about the 20th century historical characters than we do those of the Italian Renaissance. But in both cases, I mean, I treat them equally. I really do my best to adhere as closely as possible to the known documented information that we have about each person. Now, the two main characters, Bellina in Renaissance Italy and Anne during World War II, are fictional, but that allows them to move around and be at the right place at the right time. But they're operating in a world that is as real as I can make it as a novelist. I mean, I do my best to try to, recreate the world that my characters are living in as much as possible. But writing about real people is a special challenge, and I think we bear the burden of responsibility to get it right. And, if we take liberties to, mention it to the reader in the author's note, so they know if something, was stretched, or if some details were changed. But it's, there are a lot more holes in our knowledge in the Italian Renaissance, obviously. And so that allows for a little bit more creative liberty, I think, when you can fill in those holes with your own imagination. For World War II, certainly we know so much more. We know, what the weather was like on any given day, and we know the movements of particular individuals, and so it's a completely different animal, really, with the research. And then Leonardo Da Vinci is a narrator in The Stolen Lady, and Leonardo is a completely different story. I mean, my goodness, we know so much about him, and there's been so much written about him. At the same time, there are huge gaps in our knowledge. And so he's been a really fun character for me to write in The Stolen Lady, and in the book before it, The Night Portrait.
Yeah, I absolutely loved it. And I mean, my book spans 2 years, your book spans 500. That's a hugely ambitious thing, but it works so well. And I also loved the way we travel around France in the Second World War. Did you find it a challenge? I know you wrote this during lockdown, to do the research during that lockdown period.
It's interesting because my historical novels are have all been researched kind of over a long span of time. I started out as an art historian, and so I started reading, I studied the Mona Lisa and I've studied The Lady with the Ermine for decades. But, when I started writing books about these works of art, then it allowed me to kind of go deep. For The Stolen Lady, it was such a surreal experience because certainly under normal circumstances, I would have been physically in these locations that I was writing about. Thankfully, I was in Florence for a while right before the pandemic really got bad in Italy. And I was very grateful that I was able to be there just before. But the rest of the book I was researching and writing. I was in the revision process in March 2020, and then in the months following. And it was a challenge, yes, but in some ways it was a saving grace because while my husband was doing conference calls from one side of the house and my 4 children were homeschooling from their various corners of the house, I was out in my lawn chair or, in my office, just traveling vicariously in my imagination to the Chateau of the Loire Valley or to the Arno, the Ponte Vecchio in Florence. And so in a way, it saved me from the isolation of the pandemic to have these vicarious travels. And as soon as I sent the book to my editor, she said, "Oh, thank goodness I got to travel a bit while reading your book because I've been stuck here, in my apartment for months." So.
Yeah, it was definitely a nice way to escape all that was going on, wasn't it?
Absolutely. And you were also working on this book during the pandemic as well. Tell me about your research.
Yeah, well, I was really lucky actually because I did want to go and look at archives of asylums and epilepsy colonies. There's still, it's not an epilepsy colony anymore. It's a school for children with severe epilepsy, but it was an epilepsy colony in the 1920s, and they opened their archives for me. And I went literally just before lockdown, so I was able to look at all of that.
Where is that located?
So it's in England, in Sussex, and I was just so lucky to be able to get there just before it all locked down, because those first-hand materials are so useful, as I'm sure you appreciate. So, yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And what's your writing process like? You mentioned that you are a pantser and not a plotter. For those of you who don't know what a pantser is, it's someone who writes by the seat of their pants. I'm a hardcore plotter, so I'm always in awe of people like you who just sit down and write. I just think it's like magic.
Oh, I wish I was a planner, because I think I waste a lot of drafts. So I do a lot of drafts. Yeah, I usually have a theme and an idea and a kind of setting and an idea how it begins and how it ends. And then I write what I call a terrible first draft, where I'm just finding the story, finding the characters. I go down a few blind alleys, and yeah, it just kind of ends up in a big mess with lots of notes all over it. And then I write a second draft, and usually after the second draft, I then write a plan for the next draft. And that third draft is usually the one I send off to my agent or my editor. So that's sort of my very rough and not very professional method, but it seems to work. How about you?
Well,
Are you a spreadsheet person?
I'm more of a plotter, although I did write my first novel kind of more like what you just described. In fact, I wrote the entire thing in the past tense, and then I went back and wrote it again in the present, which is something I wanted to ask you about too. But I now start with an Excel spreadsheet, which is the geekiest thing in the entire world. And it's funny because I really am not a math person at all, but it has all text in it, no numbers. But I do kind of, go through and create sort of a story skeleton. And then as I go back and add, muscles and flesh on the bones as I go. But never does it turn out exactly like I started. The characters sort of take on a life of their own. Sometimes they take you in places that you didn't expect. And so I think really I've come to learn that the outline is more of a kind of a security blanket for me. It's sort of like, okay, I have an idea. I know where I'm trying to go. I know what the ending is that I'm trying to get to. I know kind of what some of the signposts are along the way, but it often veers in different directions. And I also go through many drafts. So maybe it's sort of a similar process in the end.
Yeah, I think that's part of, for me though, that's part of the joy, is to have the freedom to think I can just try things. And I think if I had a strict plan, I'm not sure I would do that. It's just me, but everyone's different, aren't they?
Yeah,
So.
it is amazing. The more, every writer you speak to has a different way of doing what they do. And I think it's fascinating to hear people's different processes. I wanted to ask you about the present tense, because I know you are writing in the present tense in The Hidden Child, and I have written both in the past and the present. Do you enjoy writing in the present tense, and why did you choose to write in that voice for this book?
Yeah, for this book, it just wrote itself in the present tense. I didn't set out to do it that way. It just sort of happened. I did the same as you with my previous book. I wrote it in the past tense, and then I switched to the present. And this one just wrote itself like that. I don't know if I think it's more immersive writing in the present tense. You're sort of more in the moment. But I think different books call for different things. Yeah, I don't know. How about you? How do you make that decision?
Yeah, I agree. I think it sort of depends on the book. My book, The Night Portrait, and now The Stolen Lady, are in the past. All of the characters are in the past except for Leonardo da Vinci, who writes in the present tense. And like you, that was just sort of how his voice came to me. I think because I was reading a lot of his own writing when I started the project. And so hearing his own voice, just speaking in the present, I wasn't able to hear it in the past anymore, as soon as I read his own words. And so I think it just came out that way. I'm writing the book that I'm working on right now is set in Florence in 1942 and 43, just 2 years. And it's also, I'm writing it in the present tense, and it just seems like it's what the story calls for and how the characters are speaking to me as I'm going through the project. So I think it really just depends on the book.
Yeah, that was going to be my next question. What are you working on at the moment?
So I'm working on a story that centers around the evacuation of the Uffizi galleries in Florence during World War II. And I'm having a lot of fun with it. It's such a beloved setting for me. I mean, any art historian worth their salt loves Florence dearly. And so it's just a great setting, and I'm enjoying researching some things about the city that I didn't know before, because certainly Florence is the capital of the Italian Renaissance, but there's so many really interesting art historical adventures to go on in later centuries. So that's what I'm having fun with now. How about you? What are you working on?
So I'm working on, this one is a dual timeline. Most of it is set in the early 1960s, there's a thread in the 1940s, and it's really about it's about women and their position in society, and society's sort of unspoken expectations of what a woman should be, particularly a mother. And yes, there's most of it again is set in the present tense, but my 1940s section is set in the past tense, which again, it just came out like that. So yeah, it's just writes itself sometimes.
I can't wait to read it. It's there's so much interest now in the 1960s in historical fiction. It's such an exciting era, I think, for new stories. So I can't wait to read it.
Thank you. And yours. I love being transported to other places in the world and other eras, which we all are at the moment. So
Hi, ladies, I'm back. I know, I can't wait for both of your new topics, because Laura, for you, what happened in the during World War II and to art during that time period, and where it went and tracking it down, I mean, that just has to be a plethora of information for you.
Oh, it's crazy. It's like an endless font of topics.
Right? I
Yes.
mean, it's got to be, I mean, and is a part of it a little bit heartbreaking about what happened to some stuff?
Oh yeah, and it's just kind of mind-boggling to me, just the scale of it. You know, it's just so massive, you know, the scale of moving works of art around. And it's kind of incredible that so many works of art actually did survive and went back to where they belonged to begin with. It's really an amazing story.
Because I think that, you know, patrons of the arts, I'm sure everybody was, you know, there was a personal survival that people had to do, but then there was probably this thing of just like preserving these things that had been around for hundreds and hundreds of years.
Yes, and buildings and, you know, monuments and churches and bridges and,
Yeah.
you know, all these things that were being, you know, blown to smithereens. And so it's a fascinating subject, I think.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And Louise, Laura was right. I mean, the 60s, it's, you know, when you think about women here in the United States in the 70s couldn't have their own credit card without their husband signing off. I mean, in the 60s was the prelude to so many things changing in women's lives. It has to be a really interesting time period to write about too.
Yeah, I love to pick time periods of social change, and this is the early 60s, so just before it all really kicks off. So,
yeah, because that was like the late 50s, you know, there was this innocent, you know, everybody's moms were sitting making home, you know, homemakers and all that, and then it just kind of, everybody kind of got their, said, wait a minute, there's more that we can do. And thank goodness for them doing that. They blazed a lot of trails for us.
They did, but it's also about things going backwards as well, because during the war in the 40s they had a lot more freedom, and then of course it all backtracked.
They got a lot of things taken away from them, you know, because there was, you know, they were the ones, Rosie the Riveter. They were the ones out there doing that work.
In the pandemic, we've seen, you know, actually it's been harder on women. Women have been the ones to have to homeschool as well as do their jobs. And yeah,
it's a very interesting topic. Okay, we do have some questions that came in from the Zoom chat. So Sandy's on here, and Sandy says that she oops, let me see one second. She says, thank you both so much for writing these stories. They're so fun and interesting, and she's learning so much. So she would like to know, and Laura, we'll start with you. What advice would you give to people just beginning to write?
Oh, well, that's a big question. I would say read. I mean, you know, being a reader made me a writer, and I can't imagine, you know, being a writer without it. Read widely, you know, as well as in whatever genre you are interested in. I read a ton of historical fiction, but I really work to read outside of my genre, because you always have these light bulb moments. But you know, and really more than reading, I mean, really try to analyze the stories. How are they working? What is, like these questions that Louise and I were asking each other about, looking at the tense and the way the characters are put together. So I would say, yeah, just read as much as you possibly can.
Precisely. Louise, do you have any advice?
Yeah, I would say two things: persistence, and don't be in too much of a hurry, because writing is a long game and you're not going to be perfect straight away. And never compare what you're writing with finished books, because bear in mind, those books have been through multiple drafts and through lots of different sets of eyes. Get other people to read your work, preferably not your family or friends who are going to say it's amazing, but people who can constructively say things about it, take it on board, and just keep going.
Really good advice for both of those. And it's pretty much what every author says, reading is essential to it. And we just hosted Alice Hoffman last week too. And she said that she writes because she doesn't necessarily now read as much as she used to, because writing for her has become that, because she wants to create these worlds. And so it's a way. The saying is, if the book isn't out there that you want to read, write it. So, and then Susan asked a question earlier about your research, but you answered that in the conversation. So we were kind of laughing in the chat, like you were reading her mind on her question. So she has another one. What would, and Louise, we'll start with you on this one. What would you like a reader to take away from this book? And she's thanking us for the great conversation.
Oh, I think I would just like people to talk about the issues that come out of it. So yeah, I think it's a sort of a good book club topic, because it does bring questions like, what would you do in that situation? But really just to think about how we view other people, how we view disability and things that don't always get talked about. Yeah, just to think differently about things.
Open the conversation. Yeah,
exactly.
And Laura, how about you?
Well, I think for The Stolen Lady and for all of my historical novels, actually, what I hope that readers appreciate is that works of art, once they leave the hand of the artist, have entire lives that happen after that. And they have so many adventures. Certainly the Mona Lisa, has gone on so many incredible adventures, and people have seen the Mona Lisa in, Leonardo saw it as a creator, Lisa and her husband saw it as a patron. Others saw it as an audience, a contemporary audience. And then you just think, what if you were to invite Leonardo da Vinci into the gallery in the Louvre today, where his portrait of Lisa is? I think he would absolutely faint. But, these works of art have adventures and lives of their own, much later. And so those for me are some of the most fascinating topics, to really focus on a single work of art. So, if people come away appreciating that era or that work of art in a new way, then I've done my job.
Very good. Louise, for you, the title, was The Hidden Child always the working title, or did that kind of morph?
Titles are always a sticky subject. Do you know what? This was just book 2 for a very long time. And I couldn't think of a good title for it. And actually my editor at William Morrow came up with that title. And I loved it when she suggested it. So yes.
And is it one of those things that when you finally see it, it's like, that's it?
Yes, yeah. Exactly. So I'm very grateful to her.
Yeah, because titles are always, I'm always fascinated with the title, because the title, just like a book cover, it's like they from a bookseller standpoint, they matter a lot. How about you, Laura? Was The Stolen Lady always your working title?
No, actually, like you, I just didn't have a title for a while. And I went on a weekend retreat by myself in a hotel room for 48 hours as I was going through the final revision. And I sat there in my Scrivener document. Scrivener is a software program for writers. And I had a list of like 25 titles. And at the end of the weekend, I emailed them to my editor and my agent. And I said, okay, what do y'all think? And we whittled it down and whittled it down. And The Stolen Lady came out of it. But, you know, other books that I've written, you know, like I have a novel that is about the creation of Michelangelo's David. And it was The Giant from the very start. I just knew that was the title before I even wrote a word. So it just depends on the book. But you're right, the titles are tricky. The titles and book covers are very tricky.
It really is. And I mean, and for the most part, the marketing departments at these big, they do a great job. I mean, they really kind of, you know, they know their business. So it's good for us booksellers that that they do that. And then we'll close just with kind of a fun. So I think, and I was listening in, but I don't remember if I heard you talk about this. So Laura, for you, do you write every day? What's your, or do you, you know, as the mood hits you? Are you very, I mean, I know you're disciplined and you're plotting out, but do you write every day too?
I work on a book every day. So that might be plotting, it might be first draft, it might be second draft, it might be some other iteration or revision. It might be taking a walk and thinking about something, you know, thinking about a character or dictating. Sometimes I dictate words into my phone, or sometimes I dictate ideas into my phone. But I'm constantly, you know, I have in my bathroom a waterproof whiteboard with an eraser, because sometimes when you're, you know, washing dishes or taking a shower or taking a walk or doing laundry or something a little bit mindless, that's when the idea, something strikes, you know, something really important strikes. So I'm always working on it in my brain, but it's not always, you know, words coming out on the keyboard every single day.
Right, right. How about you, Louise? Do you sit down every day and write, or kind of the same thing?
As much as I can, but I would agree with Laura, even if I'm not writing, my brain is constantly worrying about the story, or yeah, sometimes I actually find it helpful to be away from my desk. So walking my dog is my thinking time. And I like to do that actually before I sit down, because it just something happens when you're moving around and things unstick almost in your head. And it is when I get a lot of my ideas or solve a problem or something, is when I'm walking.
There's a question that's going to come in. I'll bring Susan your question in a second, but because I'm always fascinated by this too. So Louise, when you're writing, do you go back and like edit the day before work, or do you just go right on through?
It slightly depends. If I'm doing a first draft, I just keep pushing on because I want to get through the story, and it doesn't matter if it's absolutely awful writing. But I'm on my third draft at the moment of my next book, and I am going back, reading through, editing as I go, because I know where I'm going now. So I'm tidying up as I go along. So it sort of depends on the draft.
On the draft, on which draft you're at. How about you, Laura? Do you kind of go back and fix as you go, or do you just kind of do the same thing and get it all out?
It's very hard for me to turn off my editor brain, but I do write. I don't write in a linear manner. I don't start at the beginning and write through to the end. I go scene by scene, and the scene I'm working on first might be in the middle of the book, or it might be at the end, or it might be at the 1/4 mark. You know, it's just kind of the scenes. I sort of have milestone scenes, and I work on those first, and then I go back and fill in you know, what happens between the milestones.
So it's kind of, so you're almost putting a puzzle together, because I'm always fascinated by that too, especially when there's
100%. I'm a puzzler. That's how my brain is. So it's like you're putting the corner pieces and the edge pieces together first, and you see a face and you put it together, or you see a house and you put it together, and then you fill in all the blank spots.
Yeah, interesting, because that is, I've always been fascinated when you write in dual timeline, because some people write like a whole timeline, Like if it's told from this person's perspective, and then they write the other person's, and then they kind of chop it in together. So.
Yes, I did do that with the night portrait. I have 4 narrators, and I wrote them all in silos and then wove them all together. So it depends on the book.
Yeah. So Susan is asking about, and this is always, I think, for new writers and for people who are just getting into the business, and Louise will let you take this one first. What's the difference between an editor and an agent in your writing process?
Okay, so it slightly depends, I think, on the agent and whether your book is under contract. So so for instance, with in the UK, I had a 2-book deal. So my agent didn't need to see my second book at all because it had already been bought. So it just went straight to the editor. If it's a new book that's got to go out on submission or be sold, then my agent tends to see it first. And it really depends on the agent and the author as to how much you want their involvement. So I do sometimes talk through ideas with my agent before I start writing. And she might say, no, that's a dreadful idea, don't touch it. Well, she hasn't done that. But anyway, so yeah, I use her a little bit like that. And then she doesn't really see it until I've written it. And then I send it to her. With the editor, they will send you quite detailed editing notes that you then have to sort of.
Yeah, because they're sort of the final word on everything as far as, you are ultimately, but with the editor is really more
collaboration.
The
final word. So you discuss with your editor the changes. So
about the same for you, Laura, or a little different?
Yeah, very much the same as what Louise described. And the editor-author relationship can be just really wonderful, and you get such constructive feedback in the notes. And, sometimes it's a really big job to go back and address all of those changes. But I mean, I always find that the story in the book comes out so much better after, reading those editorial notes and taking them to heart and going back and trying to, incorporate them in. So, developmental edits like that, content edits can make a huge difference in the quality of the final product, for sure.
Right. Yeah. And that's the thing. And I think when you both said about new writers, like other people reading your work, you have to take some of that, you may think it's, this is the best thing ever, but your editors are really fine tuning it for you. And
and I would say be careful, newer writers, because I think a lot of people get involved with writer groups, but make sure that you're really, if at all possible, going to professional editors, paying them for their services earlier in the process, because it really, someone with a lot of experience in your genre and knowing what the expectations of those readers are and seeing the structural parts of it, having a really professional opinion can make a huge difference.
And I want to just clarify with that, that's before you've sold something, when you're really in that.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Once you sell something, your publisher provides you with an editor that is really the one that takes that book and refines it. So there's kind of 2 editing processes as a new writer that you go through first before you probably even put it into submission with an agent.
Absolutely.
And then if it sells, then you have another editing process with that publisher.
Yeah.
Okay. Yes. So Susan, yes, the editor is the one who asked for the revisions. She asked that question real quick. So we're out of time here. Just a closing question for each of you. So Laura, what were some of the, do you have one thing that you did during the pandemic that was just fun, weird, whatever? I always love to hear what I bought lipstick when we were wearing masks. I don't know. I couldn't buy enough lipstick. So that was...
Oh gosh. Well, this one is going to be such a weird thing, but I'm on the coast of, my home is on the coast of Georgia, and I spend that's where I spent all the lockdown months. And we have baby alligators in our pond. So the kids and I spent a lot of time hanging out, watching the babies. So
But
that's
you probably
fun.
didn't have time to do that before. It's just like,
Right,
until we see what they were
exactly.
doing. It's like, we have lots of time to watch those baby
Well, I have
elephants.
lots of pictures on my phone from that few months of these little legs dangling in the water. So there you go. That's, you take the girl out of South Georgia, but
I
you can-
love it. Well, how about Louise? How about you, Louise? Anything, anything fun or strange that you did?
Well, we got two, well, it's not that strange. We got two kittens, which we now adore. The two strange things we did was we had my son's 18th and my daughter's 21st during lockdowns. And to try and make them as fun as possible, for my son, we did this virtual Californian day. It's not Californian, sorry, a Caribbean day. So we made everyone dress up in crazy Caribbean clothes. We had Caribbean music, Caribbean food, and we FaceTimed loads of people and got them all to dress up. And so we did that for him. And then for my daughter, who's really into drama and acting, we did this crazy virtual sort of murder mystery thing where we all had to dress up. And yeah, so that's what we did.
Oh, fun. That's a creative. I love the murder mystery idea. That's a really creative thing to do, the dramatic readings and everything. Ladies, it was so fun having both of you. Everybody, The Hidden Child and The Stolen Lady, available at Warwick's. We have signed book plates, so make sure you put that in the notes if you want to. We'll have those while supplies last. Thank you both. When we close out here, we kind of go away. So
thank you so much. And don't forget to support your bookstores. They're really important for readers. So go out and support Warwick's and your local stores.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Have a great rest of your vacation, Louise.
Thanks, Louise. Nice talking with you.
And you, Laura. Bye.
Bye-bye.